David Cormatt, Julia Hartley-Moore, fantastic stuff. I'm Wallace Chapman. See you tomorrow at 3:45. Take care. Lisa Owens, Checkpoint next. See you tomorrow.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere aki nei, a gang of 10 kids as young as 12 have used stolen cars to smash their way into a North Shore dairy, leaving a young family utterly traumatised and afraid. Air New Zealand's warning there could be more flight disruptions during the peak holiday crush. So what are your rights if they cancel on you? And the right to rodeo is being challenged in the High Court, with an animal rights group claiming it's unlawful and unnecessary. Situations vacant, there's heaps of them, so how hard is the government working to help fill them? The Immigration Minister is live. Hands off the sand, protesters rally against sand mining at Pakiri Beach, and Sofia, the flying observatory, prepares to head home to NASA.
RNZ News at 5. Good afternoon. Ahi Marie, ko Aviation tēnei. A North Shore dairy owner says his family's traumatised after 10 teenagers ram-raided his store early this morning. Nimesh Patel, whose young family live above Elizabeth Dairy, were woken by an alarm as stolen vehicles were driven at speed into the front of the store. 10 youths were arrested after fleeing in 2 stolen cars. One car was spiked 23 kilometres south in St John, while another came to a stop in Manukau, over 30k from the crime scene.
We were the small family running a small business and long hours. So at least we expect the safety. We pay the tax as well. At least we accept the more safety.
Mr Patel and a neighbouring dairy owner have applications in with local authorities for bollards outside their stores. North Shore Councillor Chris Darby says he's looking at how the installation can be expedited. You can hear more on this story next on Checkpoint. The National leader, Christopher Luxon, says the rest of the world is moving on from COVID-19 and it's past time New Zealand ditches its traffic light system. Mr Luxon has recently returned from a 10-day trip through Singapore, Dublin and London, where he met various officials and politicians. He says COVID-19 was not a feature of his travels.
I have to be honest, the rest of the world's moving on. There wasn't a single COVID conversation I had while I was in Ireland with any particular political leader or official or any organisation that I met with. It was just pretty simple, they were moving on.
Christopher Luxon says New Zealand's traffic light settings are convoluted and should be replaced by a clear set of rules for mask use and isolation. Nearly 690 people are currently in hospital with COVID-19, the highest level since April. As Omicron cases surge, mask wearing and second boosters are being cited as the most important protective measures against the virus. Public health senior lecturer Leslie Gray from University of Otago, Wellington, says the use of masks is falling, even in places where it's mandated. She co-authored a study on attitudes to mask wearing in New Zealand during the first level 4 lockdown in 2020.
We're not a society that's used to having to wear masks. So in the last couple of years, it's taken a lot of getting used to, and a lot of people are still masking up. And we're just asking people who forget or who are thinking they don't need to, just take that mask with you just for a little while longer.
Leslie Gray says masks help to prevent the spread of COVID and are both easily accessible and easy to use. Animal rights groups taking the Agriculture Minister to court over rodeos say while a judicial decision won't ban the sport, the government might have to. SAFE and the Animal Law Association argue proper processes weren't made in adopting new welfare codes for rodeo in 2018. They say the codes and how rodeo is operating under them violates the Animal Welfare Act. While the court can't put a ban on rodeo from this case, SAFE's Deborah Ashton says the government might have to ban parts of the sport.
If we win this case, is that it goes back to the government, essentially, and that a draft code of welfare is redeveloped, or potentially rodeo is put to an end because the government can't produce, essentially, a code of welfare that would align with the Act.
Deborah Ashton says events such as steer wrestling cause unnecessary distress and pain to the animals. And Transpower is confident it can handle power demand over the next few days, despite severe weather warnings for much of the country. Heavy rain, snow and strong winds are forecast for tomorrow, with 46 severe weather warnings and watches in place. The grid operator has issued 2 power shortage warnings over the past fortnight. Grid Delivery General Manager Mark Ryle says the average forecast temperatures nationally are not as low as previous cold snaps. He says there's less demand on the network ensuring school holidays. Sorry, that's supposed to be during school holidays. In sport, the All Blacks loose forward Ardie Savea has leapt to the defence of under-fire coach Ian Foster in the wake of Saturday's loss to Ireland in Dunedin. Ireland's 23-12 win was their first against the All Blacks in New Zealand and levelled the 3-match series at 1-1 with the decider in Wellington on Saturday. The result means Foster's win rate has dropped below 70% and again has led to calls for him to be replaced ahead of next year's World Cup. Captain Sam Cane has also copped criticism with questions over whether he remains the best option for the number 7 jersey. Sofia says while there's always noise from outside, he tries to ignore it.
It does hurt because, we're a family here, but we've got each other's backs and people perceive what they see, but they don't know what goes on inside. So I back my coach, back my script, back my players 100%.
The Silver Ferns coach, Dame Nolene Taurua, hasn't joined the team in camp after testing positive for COVID-19. It's a blow for the side as they prepare for this week's series against New Zealand A, NZ Men and a mixed team in the lead up to the Commonwealth Games. Taurua is isolating and hopes to rejoin the team later this week. Meanwhile, the Silver Ferns' preparations for next year's Netball World Cup have received a boost, with confirmation they'll play Jamaica in 3 tests in Aotearoa in September. And New Zealand has finished second at basketball's 3x3 Asia Cup tournament in the Philippines, beaten 21-17 by Australia in the final. That's the news.
Another Grand Slam win for Novak Djokovic.
This is what he does. He just grinds you into the ground and makes life very difficult.
A rare loss for the All Blacks.
A former flatmate of mine who lives in Southern California, American Rob I call him, became an All Blacks fan while living here. He messaged me, "This is an outrage. Foster is as weak as the Australian bear he's named after."
And everyone mucks in at the opera.
Having singers go down even in normal times is not totally unusual, and with the challenges we have, of course, now. So we had a cascade of people stepping up.
Sport and drama on Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
You're on Checkpoint next with Lisa Owen. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Tuesday. Severe weather warnings and watches are in force for rain, snow and wind, affecting many parts of the country tonight or tomorrow. From Northland to Taumadunui and Taranaki, including Coromandel, rain with heavy falls overnight, turning to showers tomorrow morning, northeast gales overnight and tomorrow morning. For eastern North Island areas, from Bay of Plenty to Wairarapa, also for Whanganui, Taihape and Manawatu. Rain becoming widespread by tonight with heavy falls in some places. Rains easing to isolated showers tomorrow afternoon, easterly gales tomorrow morning. From Horowhenua to Wellington, also Marlborough and Nelson, periods of rain, heavy in some places tomorrow. Easterly gales in exposed places tomorrow. Bulla and Westland, mostly cloudy with isolated showers, but a period of rain tomorrow. Severe easterly gales in exposed places tomorrow. Canterbury and Otago, patchy drizzle in Canterbury, turning to widespread rain tomorrow morning with snow down to 400 metres. Heavy falls expected. Easterlies are strengthening tomorrow. Southland and Fiordland, clouds increasing, scattered rain later tomorrow. And for Rekohu, the Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy, rain and northeast gales tomorrow night. It's 7 minutes past 5. I'll have the latest headlines and traffic for you at about 20 past 5.
Nā mihi iwi, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Tonight, hundreds of health professionals warn of a sector-wide crisis, saying comments by political leaders declaring there is no crisis are out of step with what they're experiencing. More on that shortly. But first, a young family's been left traumatised and scared after 10 youths ram-raided their North Shore dairy where they live above. Nimesh Patel was woken by an alarm just before 1 a.m, peering out his his window to see several kids and teens smashing stolen vehicles through his shop front. 10 suspects then sped off, tracked by the police chopper over Auckland Harbour Bridge, before being arrested several kilometres from the crime scene. Mr Patel told Checkpoint the attacks left his family frightened and his shop ruined. Nick Trubridge and cameraman Nick Monroe have the story.
What is this here? What is this here?
10 young people in stolen cars smashed their way into a family business in the dead of night. But this is no ordinary ram raid. It is effectively a home invasion.
We were just freaked out, man. We were just freaked out. My wife, since been last night, she's been crying till this morning. I have just dropped my son to my friend's place and I have just settled down her, because I had to make her prepare to clean up the shop and everything.
Nimesh Patel, his wife and his sleeping 5-year-old son cowered in their upstairs apartment as their business below was devastated. Doors caved in, glass shattered, stock stolen.
I was so scared, because first priority is my life.
It was just before 1 a.m. when all hell broke loose. Nimesh, the latest innocent victim in a raft of violent break-ins.
Today's a me. Tomorrow could be another one. A lot of pregnant women, a lot of young child staying in the shop with the evening with the parents. Well, the hubbies go to work. They always keep pregnant lady in the shop. They always have the little child behind the counter with the shop. Where about their security?
Nimesh is well known in this community, usually a bright personality. He's gutted, disillusioned, trying to make sense of why anyone, let alone kids and youths, would target his young family.
We have small family, me, my wife and my 5-year-olds. So we're working so hard, 105 hours the shop hours a day, a weekly. After hours you still have to do paperwork, prepare the orders, clean up the shop and everything, make sure you have everything in stock. Plus same time you look after the kids as well. So it's not that easy job that we're doing now.
The clean-up is now well underway here at Elizabeth Dairy. The shop front has been completely devastated. The family left extremely shaken. There were 10 suspects in total. They were trailed over the Auckland Harbour Bridge in 2 stolen vehicles once they left here. One of the vehicles was spiked in the Auckland suburb of St John's. The other made it further, coming to a stop and being abandoned 32 kilometres south of here. As I said, 10 suspects in total, and none of them beyond high school age. John XL lives next door to the Patels, but Nimesh isn't just his neighbour. He's a mate, a good guy.
Not good, not good. You don't know how hard they work. It's upsetting. Yeah, real bad.
Alpesh Patel owns Belmont Superette across the road from Nimesh and says he knew something was up when he saw Elizabeth Dairy shut down and boarded up.
He is very unsecure, man. Nowadays, every day, very noisy cars, every day, boom, boom, too much noise. We can't sleep even peacefully. Even the daytime, too much traffic, but we can't feel the secure here. So please, if the police or government can do something, that's better for all the businesses.
He and Nimesh have something in common. Both owners have applications in with local authorities for bollards out the front of their businesses. 5 years. So we put that to North Shore Councillor and Planning Committee Chair Chris Darby, who's on the scene offering support to Nimesh and his family.
I've become aware of an application that went in for bollards in front of the dairy last week. And my colleague Councillor Hills is chasing that up this morning. We're treating with Auckland Transport. We want to get that fast-tracked. I think there's some detail that had to be addressed. Look, it's just unfortunate that the bollard wasn't here to obstruct that ram raid last night, but we're doing our damnedest to get it in pronto.
In the meantime, Nimesh and his family are left to pick up the pieces. He cuts a dejected figure.
We were the small family running a small business and long hours. So at least we expect the safety. We pay the tax as well. At least we accept the more safety.
In a statement, the police told Checkpoint 6 of the alleged offenders have been referred to Youth Aid. Another 4 headed for the youth court. Meanwhile, Nimesh Patel and his family are left rebuilding their livelihood. Their shop smashed, scared, in their own home.
It is 14 minutes past 5. Kia mau tonu mai. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Air New Zealand is warning there could be more flight disruptions to come as wild weather, sickness and engineering issues have already forced the cancellation of some school holiday travel. The airline's brought back its COVID or sickness flexibility policy to help to ease some of the pressure, with more than 2,500 people swapping their tickets for credit already. But what happens when the airline cancels on you? A passenger Checkpoint spoke to was booked to fly from Auckland to Christchurch with Jetstar on Saturday. Her flight was cancelled. That airline has confirmed it will refund her, but has warned it could take up to about a month. But Beth still needed to get to Christchurch by Monday for an urgent family commitment that couldn't be moved, so decided to book another ticket, this time with Air New Zealand. It was $400 one way.
And then 4 hours later, I just received a text message saying that that flight was also cancelled for operational reasons. And it took me to a link, and it said that I could have one free change, look for another flight for free. But again, there were none that would have got me to Christchurch on time, or I could get a credit. And so I really didn't have any choice but to accept the credit.
So back to the reason that they gave you, what did the text say?
Sure, it's Air New Zealand. We're sorry, but we've had to cancel your flight to Christchurch today because of operational requirements.
And in terms of the options that you were given, what would you like at this point?
I would like my money back because I booked that flight and 4 hours later, suddenly it wasn't going. And I was left with no way of getting to Christchurch for the reason I needed to get there. And now I have to wait to get a credit. I haven't even had the email saying the credit's been applied. I think it's really poor that they've taken my money and now they say that I can have a credit. Jetstar is actually willing to refund my money, but Air New Zealand will only give me a credit, and I think that's terrible, especially in this current climate.
So no refund for the $400 flight to Christchurch, cancelled by the airline and through no fault of the passenger. Air New Zealand declined to be interviewed and couldn't say how many flights have been cancelled in the past week. Well, joining us now is John Duffy from Consumer New Zealand. John, do you think it's fair if the airline cancels that they refuse to give you a refund?
Oh, absolutely, it's not fair, and they could be in breach of both the Consumer Guarantees Act and the Civil Aviation Act if the fault is genuinely that of the airline and they're refusing to refund and in some cases compensate travellers for the delays.
I looked on their policy on their website and it's kind of confusing. It says we may refund you if we are responsible for the cancellation. So there's some equivocation and there's a lot of, ifs, buts, maybes. How are consumers supposed to know what their rights are?
Yeah, that's part of the problem. And look, we've got information on the consumer.org website that sets out consumers' rights, but not everyone knows to go and look there. And we think airlines should be doing more to make it clear to consumers what their rights are, particularly in times like this where there's lots of different things happening, contributing to flight disruption. Both on the airline side, but also on the passenger side. Remember, we're still in the middle of a pandemic. People are getting sick all the time and are not able to fly. And some further clarity from the airlines would be useful, I think.
So several hours before that flight, that passenger got a text saying for operational reasons. So for operational reasons, then should the customer get their money back rather than only being given the option of rebooking or getting a credit when they logged onto their account?
Well, the Civil Aviation Act says that where the airline cancels the flight, then passengers are entitled to damages. Now, that's a kind of a slightly opaque legalistic way of saying, effectively, yes, they should be refunded if that's what the passenger wants. I mean, most people will just want to get to their destination, right? And I think in times like this, most consumers be pretty understanding that if you can get onto another flight and get to the place you're trying to go, that's, perfectly adequate compensation for the inconvenience of missing that first flight. But where the airline can't get the passenger to the place that they need to go to, then yes, a refund should be offered.
So you guys have been campaigning about this for yonks, right? What has happened? Where is the civil aviation legislation at? And are the changes being proposed going to solve these issues?
No, and we think this is a real failing on the part of the government in this instance, because since 2019, the Civil Aviation Act has been under review, and it's been through a select committee process, and the key clause that allows airlines to get away with not refunding consumers and when flights are cancelled beyond anyone's control is still in the legislation, and we think that needs to change.
Are you having many issues raised with you? It's the start of the school holidays, early days yet, but already cancellations?
Yes, look, a range of issues are cropping up. Obviously, we've all heard the news reports that there has been widespread disruption to flights due to bad weather, due to mechanical issues, and due to the airlines not being able to adequately staff flights. And look, all of those problems, we think the airlines are doing a good job trying to manage a really, really tricky situation. So there's no criticism there. The problem we have is where the communication with consumers about what their rights are and some of the opaqueness around whether you're entitled to a refund or another flight or a credit is really unhelpful and is creating confusion on the part of consumers.
Another issue that's been raised with us, and I'm interested to get your thoughts on this, John, is someone who went to book a flight for themselves on Air New Zealand, clicked the flight option, got a particular price. When they added a child's ticket to that, the principal ticket for the adult went up $20. What's the deal with that?
Well, Air New Zealand obviously runs a pricing algorithm, and anyone who's booked on most modern airlines online will realise that the closer you get to the time the plane leaves, the higher the price gets. And sometimes when there's limited fares left, or you're told that there's limited seats left on the plane, it can bump the price of those fares up. Because the pricing is dynamic and depends on a number of factors which aren't transparent to the consumer, really Air New Zealand can make an offer, or the airline can make an offer to you at any price for that fare. And I guess if you're travelling with two people, that means there's even fewer seats to buy from on the plane. So it could be that is what's bumped the price off.
So, John, do you think there is an algorithm which says, OK, you want to travel with someone else, so we're going to charge you a premium for that?
Look, I'm not sure. That's Air New Zealand's IP, but it could be that there's an algorithm that says if there's 5 seats left, it's at one price, but if there's 3 seats left because you're looking to buy 2, then the price per seat goes up somewhat.
Appreciate your time, John. Thanks for joining us. That's John Duffy from Consumer New Zealand. It is 21 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. And homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback on that. Have you had a flight cancelled during the school holidays? Do you want a refund? Have you just been offered a credit? What are the circumstances, particularly if it is the airline that has cancelled on you? What reason did they give? You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time to get to the headlines now. Ko iwi anō tēnei.
Kia ora, Lisa. A North Shore dairy owner says his family is traumatised after 10 young people ram-raided his store early this morning. Nimesh Patel told Checkpoint the attacks left his family frightened and his shop ruined. Air New Zealand is warning there could be more flight disruptions to some as wild weather, sickness and engineering issues have already forced the cancellation of some school holiday travel. But Consumer NZ's John Duffy told Checkpoint the airline could be in breach of consumer law if it doesn't refund passengers when it cancels a flight. National Party leader Christopher Luxon says the rest of the world is moving on from COVID-19 and it's past time New Zealand ditches its traffic light system. Mr Luxon has recently returned from a 10-day trip through Singapore, Dublin and London where he met various officials and politicians. He says COVID-19 was not a feature of his travels. Transpower is confident it can handle power demand over the next few days, despite severe weather warnings for much of the country. Grid Delivery General Manager Mark Ryle says the average forecast temperatures nationally aren't as low as previous cold snaps. And animal rights groups taking the Agriculture Minister to court say while a judge decision won't ban rodeo, the government might have to. SAFE and the Animal Law Association argue proper processes weren't made in adopting new welfare codes for rodeo in 2018. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic, no crashes or breakdowns at the moment in the main centres to report for the roads. Hazardous driving conditions though, and Aucklanders using the bridge in the morning. The Harbour Bridge may be closed because of some strong wind warnings between 2 a.m. and 9 a.m, so keep an eye out for that. And some Pine Harbour ferry crossings are cancelled for tomorrow, so have a look at that too. I'll be back with the latest headlines and another look at traffic at about 5:40.
Ngā mihi, Evie. Some restaurants and cafes are cutting short their working weeks, hotels running at below capacity, and CEOs doing dishes and changing sheets because of severe staff shortages. Last week, Sealord revealed it's 300 workers short. At the same time, the SEEK website showed 2,591 hospitality vacancies nationwide, including about 400 in Queenstown. The aged care sector is short an estimated 1,000 registered nurses. Both the Nurses Organisation and Health New Zealand have raised concerns about nurses being excluded from the same fast track to residency as doctors, instead having to wait 2 years to start the process. And businesses are looking to the government for some relief. So joining us now is the Immigration Minister, Michael Wood. Kia ora, Minister.
Good evening, Lisa.
Are you going to make any changes to the fast track for nurses?
At this stage, we're monitoring how the new settings perform. They've been in place for 1 week, so the new settings came into place on Monday, the 4th of July last week. They are a lot simpler than what we have ever previously had in the sector. They are very attractive for recruiting foreign nurses, but we want to make sure the system works, so I'm going to be watching it very closely, and ultimately we'll be pragmatic to make sure we get the outcomes that we need in these sectors.
Why not be pragmatic and move now? Because you've got two major health organisations saying, well, that they think you've got it wrong, so why not accept that and change it?
Well, for a couple of reasons, Lisa. The first is because, as is always the case with these sort of policy issues, there are always a range of things to consider. And so the decision has been made in this case to move ahead with a 2-year pathway on the basis that that provides some certainty that when nurses are here, they will work in that profession. And we think that that is important. We're hearing an alternative argument from some in the sector. I do have to say, not all. That is an argument that we can consider. But I think what we can do at this point is to actually monitor very closely how the new system actually works. As I say, it's been in place for 1 week, and the commitment that I give is to keep in very close touch with my ministerial colleagues, but also the sector, to make sure that the system is working and to take on the information that's actually coming in.
How long before you review it then? How long is long enough to monitor it?
I'm not going to put an artificial deadline on that, but I will be watching it very closely in the coming weeks and months as things progress. We also need to note, Lisa, this is not a unique problem to New Zealand. Right around the world, there is a critical shortage of these health workers. I was at the Australia-New Zealand Leadership Forum last week in a room with 100 big employers from Australia and New Zealand. They're feeling the same pressures here. So we do know that we need to immigration settings, but it's going to be challenging, and we're going to have to work collaboratively on it.
I do understand that, and that is why some people want you to make this the most attractive country and option for nurses to come to. So you are suggesting, and have suggested, that unless you do this, put a caveat on nurses, they might skip out and do other jobs. What I'm not clear on is what solid evidence you have that is what will happen. What evidence do you have?
Well, the rationale is very clear that if someone is required to work in a profession, then they will work in that profession. If they're not required to, then they have other options. And in a very hot and tight labour market,
you've made the suggestion that they would and are moving jobs. What numbers do you have to show that is currently the situation? That nurses come here and after a short period of time, well, I don't know, become truck drivers or chefs?
Oh, look, there is information that's been supplied from within the health sector.
Okay, so what numbers? Can you give me some numbers, Minister?
Which shows that there is a small percentage increase different between those two groups.
Okay.
What I would note at the moment, Lisa...
So what's the percentage difference? Minister, can you give me the percentage difference?
We had a 2% percentage difference on figures from a couple of years ago. The situation that we're in now...
So you've got outdated figures that show only 2% difference between doctors, correct, are you talking, and nurses?
No, correct. And if I can just finish my sentence, and we're now in a very, very hot labour market where there are many, many jobs available. We've got a tension here effectively between the two positions, Lisa, which is on one hand, How do we make it as attractive as possible to get nurses into the country? We want to do that. On the other hand, how do we make sure that if we have nurses here, that we retain them in the profession? And that's what we're trying to balance up here. What I'm saying is that we will keep a very close eye on this to make sure we get the outcome that we need. In the meantime, we have done some other things as well. So we're currently processing 200,000 visa, 2021 residency visas, the biggest ever opening up of residency class visas we've ever had. There are going to be thousands of nurses who we will give security to stay here in New Zealand through that process. We brought in 2,300 through critical workforce border exemptions during the COVID period. So we are looking at all of the levers we can use to be supporting the sector.
It just seems pretty thin evidence that you're basing this policy on, Minister. Would you accept that? The numbers that you've got here are pretty thin.
Well, obviously not. What I point to is something that is absolutely common sense. That if someone is required to work in a profession to retain their residency, then they will. If they're not, then we have less certainty about that.
Have you
that
considered
that we have here.
Have you considered the option, Minister, of fast-tracking nurses to residency in the same way that you are with doctors, in the knowledge that we're desperately short of nurses, and if only 2% were to leave the profession for something else, that's a hit we're prepared to take in order to get the bulk of nurses in here. Have you considered that as an option?
Look, I'll consider all of the information that comes in front of me as we actually see how things are working here. That's what we've got to do. I come back to this point. The new system has been in place for 1 week, and I have to relay this again. What we have now is a system for attracting nurses that is more attractive than we've ever had before. And I don't just mean during the COVID period. I mean before that. The key 13 groups of nurses all have the simple pathway to residency that most occupational groups do not have. So yes, we can argue about whether it's better to have a 2-year pathway or straight to residency, but this is a significant advance on the settings that we've previously had, and I will keep working with the sector to try and make sure we get the right outcome.
Appreciate you joining us, Minister. That's the Immigration Minister, Michael Wood. It is 5:30. Kia mau tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. It's time for the business news now. Ko taku hoa inai ko Anand Zaki, who's in our Christchurch newsroom. Kia ora, Anand. Rising cost of living and, well, retail spending off the back of that is stalling. Tell us more.
Kia ora, Lisa. Well, no surprises there, with households really under the pump from those rising prices. Now, we had the data from Stats NZ out today, and total spending was up 0.1%, just a fraction. But the spending in fuel is what really drove that. And that's also probably not surprising given how expensive fuel has been recently. I think it was about $3 a litre the last time I saw. But the rise in fuel costs have actually meant that spending in other areas have fallen. Now, just by a fraction, but the easing in spending in those other areas, that's coming as prices are rising nearly across the board for goods and services in New Zealand. And we have some analysis from Westpac, and they are saying that rising prices is constraining the volume of goods that households can actually purchase. So in other words, while the actual spending might be a bit steady or looks a bit steady, the amount of retail goods that households are buying is going backwards. And Westpac are saying that the pressure on household budgets are likely to get worse, and consumer prices are just going to keep going up. So no good news on this front. And on top of that, households spending on their mortgage servicing costs, well, that's going to keep going up as well. And later this week, we of course have the Reserve Bank's interest rate decision, and we're expecting a 50 basis point hike, so more pain there. So basically demand, while it's starting to ease off a little bit, the economy is still running pretty hot, and the central bank will want to slow that demand down further to bring that inflation level down, Lisa.
And Anand, we hear a lot about ethical investment funds, but they seem to be under the microscope. Tell us more.
Yeah, well, you're not short of options these days when you're shopping around for responsible investment funds. But we heard from the Financial Markets Authority today, and they've reviewed a sample of ethical funds. And they're looking at how closely the fund managers are following the responsible investment criteria around disclosures, more in particular. And they haven't published the review yet, but that's due soon. But it's interesting timing, I have to say, because there's a lot of hype around responsible investment funds these days, and that's creating a new problem which you might have heard called greenwashing. It's basically a marketing spin where a company might say how green or ethical their product is while actually not following through on that promise. And it's important, of course, that these companies follow up on that, because more and more people actually expect these companies to invest their hard-earned money responsibly. And there's a big crackdown in the US at the moment going on with their big fund managers. And we spoke to the Responsible Investment Association today, and it's an industry group, and they are saying that regulators here, they need to be vigilant because there's a lot of products coming onto the market, and they're marketing themselves around these sustainability thresholds. And this association, they're warning these fund managers that basically watch out, the regulators are coming for you, and if you're not careful, you could be in a lot of trouble.
And let's take a spin around the markets now.
Well, the top 50 index closed down 63 points, so ending its hot streak. That's 0.6% to 11,106. The New Zealand dollar is at 61.7 US cents and 90.5 Australian.
Thanks, Anand. Ka kite. Anand Zaki there with our business news. And we are at risk of a catastrophic collapse of the healthcare workforce. That's the conclusion of a survey conducted by the New Zealand Women in Medicine Charitable Trust. 900 doctors responded across 30 different subspecialties of medicine. Their responses indicated many are working in unsafe conditions with widespread understaffing and under-resourcing. Well, joining us now is the Trust Chair, Dr. Orna McGinn. Sounds quite horrifying, these results, Doctor.
Kia ora, Lisa. Yes, I must say it was very distressing to be collating these results of 900 of our colleagues.
So they were asked whether they thought the health system is in crisis, and what generally did they have to say on that?
Well, 99% felt that either there was probably or definitely a crisis. So I think probably was 6% and definitely was 93%. So pretty much all the doctors surveyed, half of whom were in primary care and half, as you say, across 30 specialties in secondary care, felt that currently they were working within a system that is in crisis.
So what do you make of the disconnect then when you have a health minister who believes that the system is coping and does not describe it as a crisis?
I can understand why health leaders don't like to use inflammatory language like a crisis, because we, and that includes us as health professionals, we don't want to undermine confidence in the system. But it is quite clear to patients who are waiting for appointments and waiting for surgery and waiting in queues at ED that the system is in crisis, and we cannot, in all conscience, dismiss when they ask us, do you think the system is in crisis? So we're gaslighting our patients if we don't agree with what they're seeing. And the really astounding thing was mostly it is airtime goes to ED and primary care, because we are on the, we're on the front foot the whole time. We are patient facing. So you do expect often to read in the media that these are the services which are suffering. But the survey showed that there was not a single specialty which was not suffering a crisis in workforce staffing. Everything from ophthalmology to palliative care to vascular surgery, renal medicine, there was not a specialty that was not represented. And you could see from the answers the toll this was taking on the staff working within the system. It was very upsetting to read some doctors describing themselves as broken or feeling that they had to leave their job. Some had already left their job. There was a very high rate of burnout reported in the survey. So we felt we needed to honour these voices by releasing the survey. It's highly unusual for doctors to be advocating for themselves. We are far more used to be advocating for our patients.
So how unsafe is it currently for both patients and doctors working in this environment then?
I think where you have shortage of staff, there will always be a degree of clinical risk. I would never want the patients to think that it was risky for them to attend hospital or to come to their GP if they're not well, because clearly we are always going to be open. But if this crisis is not addressed, there is no doubt that there will be risks to patients. And we are already seeing a widening of the equity gap, Lisa. We have shocking statistics in New Zealand about the gap in life expectancy for our Māori and Pacific versus our non-Māori, non-Pacific patients. We can get nowhere near addressing this gap unless we address this workforce crisis. Many of the respondents said that we, and I can attest to this as a GP, we are literally firefighting, and we can't address basic screening, cervical screening, cardiovascular risk screening at the moment. And again, this, as usual, affects our more vulnerable groups. So we are very conscious that we are not doing what we need to do, and this really adds to the sort of moral injury which doctors feel that they're suffering when it's actually the system which is preventing them doing the job that they want to do.
Some of the things listed in the survey was deferred care for all but life-threatening illnesses, increasing patient sickness, long delays to discharge people due to staffing issues, doctors having to work extra hours and shifts, clinical risk arising from having a high clinical load and insufficient time. In terms of GPs, an area you're very familiar with, vacancies for up to a year at a time, and unacceptably long waits for GP appointments, with up to 6 weeks being common to wait to see a GP. So that's just the start of the list here. You've written an open letter to the Prime Minister and some relevant ministers. What do you want to happen?
I think this really, what we're asking for is just to be heard, because until there is acknowledgement that there is a problem, we cannot address the problem. And it is not a sign of weakness or vulnerability to admit that the system is in crisis. I think it is perfectly reasonable to use these words. And the other thing I want to stress is that it is not the fault of one party, one minister, one group of people. We know, we who've been working in the system for many years, I've been in New Zealand 11 years, and many of the respondents have been doctors for 20 plus years. We know that this has been a slow-moving iceberg. This has not come out of nowhere. It has just been exposed by the pandemic and winter, but it was always going to happen, and our leaders have been warning of a crisis like this for many years. So really, the first thing we're asking for is an acknowledgement and listening to the health sector, because really without an engaged and motivated and supported workforce, we can't move forward with what needs to happen in Te Whatu Ora, which is the new health system. We cannot move forward and address the health inequities which exist in this country. So, yes, we are looking forward to meeting with Minister Little and other leaders just to discuss and have a korero and then move forward with some solutions.
Appreciate your time this evening. That's Dr. Orna McGinn there, discussing this survey carried out by the New Zealand Women in Medicine Charitable Trust. And as she indicated, most of the doctors surveyed there, it was in the high 90s, believe that the health system is in crisis. It is 20 minutes to 6. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback on that. The survey indicated that some GPs say it's common to have a 6-week wait to get in to see your doctor, and the health force is under stress. What are your thoughts? How do we solve this issue? You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at checkpointrnz, or the email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. The doctors say the first step is to actually acknowledge there is a crisis. Ko Evie anō tēnei. Here's Evie with the headlines.
Tēnā koe, Lisa. An Indian community leader is calling on the government to have a tougher approach on retail crimes. This follows an overnight ram raid in Auckland. 10 young people have been arrested after breaking into the Elizabeth Dairy in Belmont. Indian community leader Sunny Koshal says the government is soft on crime. The Immigration Minister is defending New Zealand's immigration settings for nurses. Michael Wood told Checkpoint the new settings have been in place 1 week, and he's waiting to see how effective it is before considering whether nurses are added to the same fast track to residency pathways as doctors. A public health lecturer says mask use is falling even as Omicron cases surge. Leslie Gray from University of Otago, Wellington, says we're not a society that's used to wearing masks, but we need to take them with us for a little while longer. Consumer NZ Chief Executive John Duffy says Air New Zealand's refusal to refund flight fares after cancellations is absolutely not fair. He told Checkpoint it could be in breach of the Consumer Guarantees Act and Civil Aviation Act if the fault is genuinely that of the airline. And astronomers are preparing to farewell a popular spacecraft on its final mission in Christchurch. The 747 is named Sofia, short for Stratospheric Observatory for Infrared Astronomy. NASA project scientist for the Sofia mission, Nasim Rangwala, says it will be a bittersweet goodbye. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic, still no crashes or breakdowns at the moment to report in the main centres, which is pretty amazing but wonderful. For tomorrow morning, if you're going across Auckland's Harbour Bridge, be aware there may be some closures due to strong wind warnings between 2 a.m. and 9 a.m. I'll have the latest news and weather for you at 6.
Kia ora rā e hoa. Masks and boosters. As we faced a second wave of COVID-19 coupled with other winter bugs, health officials say they are our best form of protection. It comes as 8,395 community cases were reported today, and almost 700 people are in hospital with the virus, including 13 in either ICU or HDU. But after almost 2 years of mask wearing, experts fear too many Kiwis have become complacent. Samantha G reports.
Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern delivering the message that's been on repeat since 2020. Mask wearing and vaccination are the most effective measures against COVID-19.
We already have requirements on masking, and this is the issue. It's not that necessarily new measures will make the difference. It's the uptake of the current ones. Please, nice and simple, wear a mask. It does make a huge difference.
The Ministry of Health says almost 91,000 second booster doses have been administered to date. They are recommended for anyone at increased risk of severe illness from COVID-19 who had their first booster at least 6 months ago. In Palmerston North, Onyx said he'd love to not have to wear a mask.
I prefer not to, but because the way things are and all that, just do it just to pretty much keep the peace with everyone else that doesn't, because there's heaps of disputes going on, etc. And I just hope when we can drop it, it's all good, but at the moment, that doesn't sound like any time soon,
Tricia dons a mask everywhere she goes to protect her immunocompromised partner, but she says there isn't consistent mask use across the board.
I feel people seem to always have masks on them, whether or not they wear it or it hasn't quite become second nature yet is a different story, but most of the people that I talk to at least have one on them to put on, so that when they go into places or if they start feeling too close to people, they can put it on.
Barry has had his second booster and always wears a mask when out shopping.
I haven't had COVID and I don't want to have COVID, and so I take every precaution I can, but I notice a lot of people aren't wearing them, especially in warehouse and places like that. Yeah, and I don't know why. It doesn't make sense.
T says people sometimes wore masks when visiting the cafe she works at, but staff don't really enforce it.
I mean, it's their choice. I mean, we have the screen here, so yeah, I know I'm meant to wear mine. But, sometimes it is hard to breathe, especially in this weather.
Catherine says masks are supplied at the op shop she works at. Staff wear them, but don't demand customers do.
I've noticed it dropping off in the last few weeks. I think as people have been getting COVID, quite often after they've had it, they're like, well, why am I wearing a mask now? And, that makes a certain amount of sense, I guess. So with the new variants and the changes in reinfection times.
Public health specialist Leslie Gray from the University of Otago, Wellington, co-authored a study on attitudes to mask wearing in New Zealand during the first level 4 lockdown in 2020. She says mask wearing appears to be declining.
We're not a society that's used to having to wear masks. So in the last couple of years, it's taken a lot of getting used to, and a lot of people are still masking up. And we're just asking people who forget or who are thinking they don't need to, just take that mask with you just for a little while longer.
She says masks help to prevent the spread of COVID, are easily accessible and easy to use.
In busy indoor spaces, especially if you're having to be in an indoor environment that's going to have lots of people for a prolonged period of time, if people could just get in the habit of popping that mask on, that would be really helpful, both to avoid transmission from a person who might not even know that they have COVID-19, but also to others around you.
Leslie Gray says what's important is people wear clean, dry masks that are well-fitting and cover the nose and mouth snugly.
It is 18 minutes to 6. Kia mau tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Protesters wanting a 20-kilometre stretch of beach north of Auckland to retain all its sand have launched what they're calling a David versus Goliath battle. They've got strong messages for the company that's been sand mining at Pakiri Beach for more than 80 years. Hundreds gathered over the weekend in opposition of 2 more resource consent renewals. Katie Todd was there.
It's a still, warm Sunday morning on Mangawhai Beach. Several hundred people were gathered, placards in hand, on the soft white sand. And it's this they've come to defend. Not visible is the dredge they say is threatening it. It's almost 20 kilometres south at Pakiri Beach, where McCallum Bros has been sand mining at 3 different depths for decades. The practice is facing increasingly loud opposition.
They are destroying our environment and for their own gain and benefits, and it's disgusting and they should be ashamed of themselves.
Despite the distance between the 2 sites, Mangawhai local Ray Greening worries the sand mining could be the reason the beach he loves is crumbling away.
See, we've lost a lot of our sand. The sand dunes have had a big slice taken out of them, and there's a lot of rocks being exposed at the water's edge. And it would be interesting to know if there's a scientific explanation connecting the 2 things, the sand mining and the local conditions.
Until that's fully understood, he believes the sand mining should be paused.
Yeah, we can't wait until it's too late.
McCallum Bros rejects that sand mining harms the environment. It claims Pakiri sand is plentiful and one of the most sustainable sources available. It argues it's much needed in Auckland, where it's churned into concrete to power major construction projects and to top up inner city beaches and sports turfs. Those in opposition had a win earlier this year when Auckland Council declined McCallum Bros' renewal of one of its 3 consents. Protest organiser Ken Raywood explains.
I describe it as winning the unwinnable that we looked at the beginning. We were able to prove the concerns for the damage that was being done to the seabed and resulting in the coastline were significant, and the commissioners and Auckland Council saw it that way as well.
McCallum Bros is appealing that decision, and now it's also trying to renew its other 2 resource consents coming up for review. Waipu resident Paul Smith is gearing up for a fight.
I don't believe McCallum's that you need this sand at all, and nor does the concrete industry.
McCallum Bros argues the sand has to come from somewhere. Its options are limited. The other main consented source of sand for Auckland concrete is the Kaipara Harbour on Northland's west coast. The mayor who oversees both coasts is Kaipara Mayor Jason Smith. He thinks the solution is simple: leave the east coast alone and sand mine solely in the west.
Sustainable, in my simple definition, is the ability to do what you're doing forever. And that is not possible with the current sand mining in the current location of Pakiri Mangawhai, because the sand is a finite resource. The sand on the west coast continues rolling in from Australia.
The counter-argument from McCallum Bros is that would cost the environment in other ways, because it would have to be taken to Auckland by truck, not by barge from Pakiri. Ken Raywood will be keeping a close eye on the consent proceedings, with one goal in mind.
I'd like to see the dredge advertised on Trade Me one day as not required by its owners any further.
The resource consent hearings are set to start on July 27th.
The legality of rodeo has been questioned today at the High Court. The Animal Law Association and animal rights group SAFE want to bring an end to what they say is an unnecessary and unlawful sport. Our reporter Kirsty Frame has been in court.
At the heart of this case is what animal rights groups say is a violation of the Animal Welfare Act. SAFE's Chief Executive, Deborah Ashton, says animal welfare needs to be front of mind.
Physical health and behavioural needs of animals do need to be first and foremost taken into consideration. Distress and injury that's been caused to animals is completely unnecessary and unreasonable when it comes to rodeo.
The group is taking the Agricultural Minister and the National Animal Welfare Advisory Committee to court over their code of welfare for rodeos. They argue proper process wasn't followed for adopting the new rules. But the animal rights groups are also here to argue the government is violating the Animal Welfare Act. The rodeo code restricts but still allows events such as steer wrestling and calf roping to occur. SAFE and the Animal Law Association say those events cause unnecessary distress and pain to the animals, which is unlawful. One of the group's lawyers, Victoria Hines, says if the judge is in their favour, it will not result in a ban on rodeo.
That is a matter for the legislature, but that assertion misunderstands the way in which the Act operates. The Act does not explicitly, with a few limited exceptions, either allow or prohibit particular activities, and it certainly doesn't allow or prohibit rodeo.
High Court Judge Justice Churchman did question whether it would make people hesitant to hold or participate in rodeo if he rules in favour. SAFE's Deborah Ashton says if they win their bid, rodeo could be banned by government.
If we win this case, is that it goes back to the government, essentially, and that a draft code of welfare is redeveloped, or potentially rodeo is put to an end because the government can't produce, essentially, a code of welfare that would align with the Act.
In 2020, SAFE and the Animal Law Association won a case against the government on similar grounds. The High Court concluded that the use of farrowing crates and mating crates for pigs breached the Animal Welfare Act. That case was referenced in much of today's arguments. Crown lawyer Ken Stephen told the court the government accepts it made a blunder with some of the processes in adopting the welfare codes in 2018, which replaced a 2014 one.
Our theory of the case, which is different from Allunyal Friends, is that what was intended, for example, had it occurred and the 18 code hadn't been put in place or labelled that, then the 14 code had two relatively minor amendments, then we probably wouldn't be here.
The case will continue tomorrow.
The All Blacks loose forward Ardie Savea has leapt to the defence of under-fire coach Ian Foster in the wake of Saturday's loss to Ireland in Dunedin. Ireland's win was their first against the All Blacks in New Zealand and means the series is on the line in Wellington this weekend. Foster's win rate has now dropped below 70% and again led to calls for him to be replaced ahead of next year's World Cup. Savea says while there's always noise from outside, he tries to ignore it.
I'll be lying if I'm scrolling through the gram and you see stuff. But I guess that's the reality of our job and what we do in the jersey. It does hurt because we're a family here, but we've got each other's backs and people perceive what they see, but they don't know what goes on inside. So I back my coach, back my script, back my players 100%.
The Wellington Test is already a sellout and Ireland play the Māori All Blacks in Wellington tomorrow night. Space lovers are farewelling an airborne observatory as it makes its final visit to Christchurch after years of research trips. Sofia, short for Stratospheric Observatory for Infrared Astronomy, is a 747 adjusted to fit a 2.7 metre telescope. Our reporter Tessa Guest and cameraman Nate McKinnon went to have a look.
Sophie Einson is a space fanatic whose dream to be aboard a NASA aircraft came true today.
Being here is just so overwhelming. It's such a cool experience and it's just so different, like being on a normal plane this morning, coming up here to being on this where they do infrared research. It's just so amazing to see all the stuff that goes on behind the scenes.
The 14-year-old from Dunedin was invited for a tour by the US Embassy after she advocated for more women to be educated about career pathways into space.
I wrote to the Prime Minister saying that we need more Kiwi mentors, women mentors for people, younger kids, for space and science in general.
Sophia is among the last people seen inside Sofia. This is its last international trip before operation shuts down in October. NASA project scientist for the Sofia mission, Naseem Rangwala, says Ototahi has become a home away from home for the California-based aircraft, with this being its 7th trip.
Christchurch has played a big role in Sofia's scientific success, and that will remain forever. You know, our team has formed very deep friendships and relationships with people of Christchurch, and that will remain. So although it's very sad that this will be our last deployment, our relationship will be very long-lasting.
She says this final mission has a special focus on mapping magnetic fields in the Milky Way, something that's made possible by New Zealand's dry skies.
So for astronomy, we want access to both skies, the northern hemisphere skies and the southern hemisphere skies. So of course we can go to another southern hemisphere country, but the reason we come to New Zealand is also because the air is much drier. So our astronomers, our scientists love flying out of New Zealand.
Rose Swears is a Rocket Lab scientist who's previously interned for NASA, joining in on the current mission. She says it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity.
I'm so excited that I'm on board, and I'm so excited that I get to fly along with this because everyone wants to do this. But it's sad that it's closing up because it's been so significant to space research.
She says Sofia is capable of unusual things.
Normally the atmosphere is in the way and the pollution is in the way, but Sofia gets above that, and it's amazing that we can fly from Christchurch and see things that are so far out in space.
Naseem Rangwala says it will be a bittersweet final departure for staff who have completed hundreds of missions with Sofia.
I think we will be celebrating that day. We will be celebrating because of 10 years of very successful science operations on this unique, complex, amazing platform, and we will be, cheering, together, and we'll be holding hands, and we'll be saying goodbye to Sofia.
Sofia will head back to California next month, where its final months of operation will take place until October the 1st.
Some of your feedback now on the issue of Air New Zealand and flight refunds. This listener says Air New Zealand may be having operational problems, but there is no excuse to treat clients the way that it has been reported. Another person says, amazes me how companies like Air New Zealand spend millions on marketing campaigns to earn our trust, yet squander it with opaque terms and conditions. On the subject of short staffing in health, last month the chemo ward at Wellington Hospital should have had 18 staff, but had 4, this person says.
RNZ News at 6. Good evening. Kia ora tātou. Ko Aviation tēnei. Doctors are warning the government there's a risk of a catastrophic collapse of the healthcare workforce. The Women in Medicine Charitable Trust has surveyed more than 900 doctors and says the response reveals profound distress over widespread understaffing and under-resourcing. The Trust says morale is low and healthcare workers are exhausted. It says many feel their concerns have been disregarded for years and the pandemic has exposed long-standing workforce problems. General Practitioner and Trust Chair Dr Orna McGinn says it's time for political leaders to acknowledge there's a crisis and take urgent action to solve it. The Immigration Minister, Michael Wood, rejects he has only thin evidence to suggest nurses are more likely than doctors to switch jobs after gaining residence here. Under recent changes, migrant nurses are eligible for residency after 2 years in the country. Doctors, though, don't have to wait at all. Mr Wood has told Checkpoint that health data from several years ago shows nurses are about 2 percentage points more likely to leave the profession.
We've got a tension here effectively between the two positions, Lisa, which is on one hand, how do we make it as attractive as possible to get nurses into the country? We want to do that. On the other hand, how do we make sure that if we have nurses here, that we retain them in the profession? And that's what we're trying to balance up here.
Michael Wood says he'll monitor the settings closely and make changes if required. A young Auckland family's been left traumatised after 10 youths ram-raided their North Shore dairy, which they live above. Nimesh Patel was woken by an alarm just before 1 a.m, peering out of his window to see several kids and teenagers smashing stolen vehicles through his shopfront. 10 suspects then sped off, tracked by the police chopper, over Auckland Harbour Bridge before being arrested several kilometres from the crime scene. Mr Patel has told Checkpoint the attacks left his family frightened and his shop ruined. Indian community leader Sunny Koshal says there's currently a crime emergency in New Zealand.
Aside from talking to social media, the government needs to get tough with those kids off the rails right now. At the end of the day, these kids or the youth, young offenders, they would be let go with the tap on their wrist.
The Prime Minister has touched down in Suva for the 51st Pacific Islands Forum. Kiribati's withdrawal from the forum and the Solomon Islands Security Pact with China are likely to be key discussion topics. But Jacinda Ardern says the number one concern for the region continues to be climate change, which is expected to have heightened in the years since the last forum. She says there are forum members who aren't expecting to experience climate change in the future. They're experiencing it now.
This is not a hypothetical, and so I expect the region will want to see from within region members a firm commitment to our own contribution, our own mitigation, but what we are doing to support one another.
Jacinda Ardern also expects there to be a heavy focus on the region's recovery from COVID. A consumer advocacy group says airlines that don't offer refunds when flights are cancelled could be breaking the law. One passenger has told Checkpoint she didn't get the option of a refund when her flight was cancelled by Air New Zealand because of operational reasons. Consumer NZ's John Duffy says the Civil Aviation Act outlines passengers are entitled to damages, but in most cases this means getting transferred to the next flight. However, he says airlines should be more upfront and offer a refund if the fault is genuinely theirs. New climate change polling shows people are becoming less tolerant of those who build in harm's way, with the overwhelming majority expecting extreme flooding to increase. The survey for major insurer IAG is now in its 5th year. Our climate reporter Hamish Cardwell has more.
The poll found a majority do not think people have a right to live in places worst affected by climate change, a 15 percentage point increase on last year. Meanwhile, people are less certain about the role they can personally play on climate change. The numbers who know what to do about it and are prepared to act have dropped. But there's been a major shift in the number of people looking to the government for direction, nearly doubling to just under half of people in 5 years.
Japan's governing coalition has won a comfortable victory in Sunday's election for the upper house of parliament. The Liberal Democrats and its partner in the coalition, Komeito, won 76 of the 125 seats contested. The BBC's Rupert Winfield-Hayes has more.
It was former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's lifelong ambition to change Japan's post-war constitution, to remove the clause that declares Japan a pacifist nation. He failed. But in the aftermath of his death, the party he led is now in a strong position to achieve that goal. The ruling LDP increased its majority in Sunday's elections and together with two allied parties now has enough votes to dramatically increase Japan's defence budget and perhaps even scrap the pacifist Article 9 of the Constitution.
Astronomers are preparing to farewell a popular flying observatory on its final mission in Christchurch. The modified 747 aircraft is named Sofia, short for Stratospheric Observatory for Infrared Astronomy. After collecting data around the world for a decade with its one-of-a-kind telescope, Sofia is ending its flights as newer technology supersedes it. Project scientist Nasim Rangwala of NASA says it will be a bittersweet goodbye.
Christchurch has played a big role in Sofia's scientific success, and that will remain forever. You know, our team has formed very deep friendships and relationships with people of Christchurch, and that will remain. So although it's very sad that this will be our last deployment, our relationship will be very long-lasting.
Sofia has made 7 trips to Christchurch altogether. In sport, unable to concentrate on the game, All Black Adi Savia says he turned to prayer after being ordered from the field in the All Blacks' loss to Ireland at the weekend. Savia was taken off to get another prop on the field when replacement Angus Ta'avao was sent off for dangerous play. Officials didn't allow the All Blacks to bring Savia back on, which team management believe was wrong as they wanted to sub off Dalton Papali'i. Savia says the experience was frustrating and confusing.
I wasn't sure what was going on. I was a bit frustrated. To be honest, I was just glaring into... I wasn't even watching the game. selfishly on my behalf. But I don't know, I thought about like who I was and kind of just prayed a little bit on the sideline, and when we got into the halftime sheets, I just kind of was just encouraging all the boys to keep going.
The All Blacks have sought clarification over the rule from World Rugby. Wimbledon champion Novak Djokovic is hoping for a rule change that would allow him to compete at next month's US Open. Djokovic beat Australian Nick Kyrgios in London this morning to claim his 7th Wimbledon title, which takes him up to 21 Grand Slam singles titles, one behind Rafael Nadal. The Serb is hoping for a change to American COVID-19 entry rules.
I'm not vaccinated and I'm not planning to get vaccinated, so the only good news I can have is them removing the mandated green vaccine card or whatever you call it to enter United States, or exemption.
That's the news.
Tonight on Night's digital artist Steve Carr and jazz genius Nathan Haynes, that's his music behind me, look forward to a multimedia gig they've got at the Auckland Art Gallery this week, which will go nicely with Fergus Barrowman's latest selection of new jazz releases. And there's a new documentary series on the former US Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, Nobel Peace Prize winner and Cold War warrior, on Nights of me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
You're on Checkpoint next with Lisa Owen. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Tuesday. Severe weather warnings and watches are in force for rain, snow and wind, affecting many parts of the country tonight and tomorrow. From Northland to Taumaranui and Taranaki, including Coromandel, rain with heavy falls overnight, turning to showers tomorrow morning. Northeast gales overnight and tomorrow morning. For eastern North Island areas, from Bay of Plenty to Wairarapa, also for Whanganui, Taihape and Manawatu. Rain becoming widespread by tonight with heavy falls in some places. Rain's easing to isolated showers tomorrow afternoon. Easterly gales tomorrow morning. From Horowhenua to Wellington, also Marlborough and Nelson, periods of rain heavy in some places tomorrow. Easterly gales in exposed places tomorrow. Bulla and Westland, mostly cloudy with isolated showers, but a period of rain tomorrow. Severe easterly gales in exposed places tomorrow. For Canterbury and Otago, patchy drizzle in Canterbury turning to widespread rain tomorrow morning with snow down to 400 metres. Heavy falls are expected. Easterlies are strengthening tomorrow. Cloud is increasing for Southland and Fiordland. Scattered rain later tomorrow. And for Te Kohu, the Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy, rain and northeast gales tomorrow night. It's 9 minutes past 6. I'll update you with the latest news headlines at 6:30.
No mihi Evie, no mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Pacific leaders are scrambling to bring Kiribati back into the fold on the eve of one of the most significant meetings in the region. Kiribati has declared it's withdrawing from the Pacific Islands Forum after expressing concerns about the leadership. Now, leaders from around the region, including Jacinda Ardern, are arriving in Fiji for the talks. Koroi Hawkins reports.
President Mamau says Kiribati had not signed up to the now controversial deal which was publicised to mend the leadership rift and prevent the Micronesian sub-region to split from the forum. His comments have been revoiced.
There was never a Micronesian President Summit caucus decision on the PIF reform packages that Kiribati was part of, and particularly an MPS collective decision to return to the PIF.
The Kiribati president had also made other requests, including that the forum push out the date of the leaders' meeting so it would not coincide with their National Day celebrations. But he said his government did not receive any acknowledgement from the forum chair, Fiji. Pacific lead at the Griffith Asia Institute's Pacific Hub, Dr. Tess Newton-Kane, says it's the first time anyone's chosen to walk away from the forum.
This meeting, one of the key things that leaders really wanted was to reset that whole idea of regional solidarity, commit to this new 2050 strategy, that this idea of the Blue Pacific, which I've sometimes thought is maybe the new version of the Pacific Way, something that everyone can get behind. I think it's very disquieting that that's not going to be able to happen.
Dr. Tess Newton-Kane says the Suva agreement was expected to unite the members and put an end to the tensions. She says the deal was expected to be signed at the leaders' meeting this week.
Now it looks that was all a bit premature, and that maybe that process wasn't as concluded as maybe we thought it was at that time.
RNZ Pacific understands the senior forum officials are still making a last-ditch attempt to convince Kiribati to reconsider its decision. But there are concerns in some circles in Suva that China is behind the shock move and Kiribati has made up its mind on the path it wants to take. Dr. Tess Newton-Kane says while there are no references in the letter that Beijing is telling Kiribati what it should do, there are indications that China is exerting a degree of influence.
The resumption of that relationship is quite recent, but as we've seen in Solomon Islands, there's been a lot of energy go into it in a short space of time, so it's ramped up quite quickly.
She says the Kiribati government appears to have been on an isolationist path for some time.
We've had not allowing in international media. The media in Kiribati is quite it's active, but doesn't get a lot of access to decisions, doesn't get access to leaders. We've had suspensions of High Court justices. So there's been this kind of steady move away from Pacific Island Forum or just regionalism generally. And also I think there's been a retreat from democracy.
But as regional leaders scramble to resolve the political issues, civil society organisations are focused on ensuring the new blueprint, the Blue Pacific 2050 strategy, reaches the communities it's intended to serve. Pacific Regional Non-Governmental Organisations Alliance head James Bhagwan said the Forum Secretariat had been effective in engaging CSO and non-state actors over the last 6 months when the strategy was being finalised.
For the last 2.5 years, civil society has strongly participated or actively participated in the processes. And if you have a chance eventually to look at the strategic pathways, you will see that there's a lot of reference to working with non-state actors.
The 2050 strategy, a 30-year plan that will form the basis of Pacific development and engagement, will be launched on Thursday at the close of the 51st Forum Leaders Gathering.
Meanwhile, Te Piramia Jacinda Ardern has touched down in Fiji for the Pacific Islands Forum as the group deals with the withdrawal of one of its members. Kiribati has pulled out, expressing concerns about the regional body's leadership. Jacinda Ardern says the disagreement has been brewing for a while.
Kiribati themselves have set out the concerns that they have, and obviously they are very, very much relate to issues around the role of Micronesia within the Forum. And the Forum has sought to try and resolve those. Obviously the chair, Fiji holds the chair at the moment, has done a lot of work to try and resolve those. Ultimately they haven't been able to do that to the satisfaction of Kiribati. I don't believe that means that as a whole that's a sign of a wider disunity. I think actually rather it demonstrates that efforts have been made, and I imagine the efforts will continue to be made.
Heading into the forum, Jacinda Ardern says climate change remains the most important topic of discussion.
The dominant theme for the Pacific Island Forum from the time that I have been privileged to attend those meetings has been climate change, and I expect that that will only be heightened at this meeting given, of course, the time that has passed. We have within the region members who are not expecting to experience climate change in the future, they are experiencing it now. And some of us have had the opportunity to see that firsthand. This is not a hypothetical.
This week presents Pacific leaders with their first opportunity to meet for face-to-face talks about the security pact between the Solomon Islands and China. Jacinda Ardern anticipates forum members will discuss their expectations about how pacts signed by individual nations affect the entire Pacific.
I think what we need to establish, though, as a forum and as a family is just what's the expectation when we have attempts to create new relationships that may have an effect on the region. What voice does the region expect to have? What notice does the region expect to have? And is it reasonable to expect that as a family we try and provide for those needs first and foremost? So that's the nature I expect the conversation to have.
Forum members will be in Suva all week, building up to the key event of the forum, the Leaders' Retreat on Thursday. It is almost 17 minutes past 6. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. 9 MPs have now joined the contest to succeed Boris Johnson as the leader of the Conservative Party and British Prime Minister. The soaring cost of living has put the candidates' tax policies under particular scrutiny. The former Health Secretaries Sajid Javid and Jeremy Hunt have both said that they will not only cancel the planned rise in corporate tax but will reduce it still further. The former Chancellor Rishi Sunak has suggested tax cuts may have to wait. This report from the BBC's Jonathan Blake.
The pace is picking up in the race to be the next Prime Minister, and this morning 2 key contenders put forward their plans. One has kept his distance from Boris Johnson.
There are a lot of very angry voters after what's happened in the last few months, and they're not going to come back to us automatically, and choosing me would be a very strong signal.
The other's resignation triggered his departure.
Once you lose confidence in your boss, your Prime Minister, I don't think you can sort of hide that. I think you have to just be honest with your boss and with yourself.
Tax cuts is the big battleground of this contest, and both would let companies keep more of their profits. Sajid Javid also cutting income tax sooner than planned, and he'd scrapped the rise in national insurance agreed while he was in government.
If we don't have the tax cuts, we won't get the growth. And if we don't get the growth, we won't be able to sustain the public services. That's a much greater risk. In all my time in government, I've never come across a decision, especially the big decisions, that don't involve risk, one way or the other.
Mr Hunt warned against personal tax cuts too soon and said reducing business rates was the way to encourage growth.
The number one priority with me, with my business experience, is to get the economy growing, and that's why not necessarily the most retail tax cuts, but the things that will boost business, make us an attractive business environment, use our Brexit freedoms to turn ourselves into the world's next Silicon Valley.
Another new entrant to the race promising, yes, tax cuts straight away.
I think it's very important as we have this cost of living squeeze that people get money back in their pockets and quickly.
The Chancellor Nadhim Zahawi, also running, says he's been subject to smears about his finances. Claims he's being investigated are false, he says, adding that he'd answer any questions officials had.
Our leadership has to change.
The Trade Minister Penny Mordaunt's campaign hit an early hitch, her promotional video re-edited to remove well-known figures. There's at least one more candidate to come. The Foreign Secretary, Liz Truss, is expected to confirm she's running soon.
Protesters in Sri Lanka have been celebrating what they believe to be the toppling of the country's leadership. The president has announced he will step down on Wednesday after demonstrators stormed his official residence and also set fire to the Prime Minister's house. Some protesters have pledged to remain in the presidential palace until he resigns. The BBC's Rajani Vaidyanathan reports.
These scenes would have been unthinkable days ago. Sri Lanka's seat of presidential power, now a sightseeing destination. Security nowhere to be seen, as thousands push their way in to a palace taken over by protesters.
This is a really surreal moment for Sri Lanka. A building that is normally heavily fortified, now a free-for-all.
At President Gotabaya Rajapaksa's private pool, we meet carpenter Ruan Chaminda, who's taking a dip. A moment of relief after he walked hours to join the protests.
My kids are hungry. We don't have fuel. We don't have cooking gas. We don't even have fuel to do our jobs properly.
How does it feel to swim in the president's personal pool?
I'm happy. I'm so happy.
Moments of joy and curiosity. But where does this leave the future of the island? The man who once lived here, President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, has now fled and is expected to step down this week.
A lot of the people here need to also witness the fact that how rich and wealthy and luxurious their lives are. Even this place, how grand, how big the house is, whereas people have been dying and have been suffering to fight for their basic necessities.
As they look around the lavish rooms, Sri Lankans continue to contend with a deepening economic crisis.
But is this the right thing to do? Is this the right way to go about it, storming the presidential palace?
Well, if the people have been demanding for the president to decently step down, with respect, we've asked him to step down multiple times. So if the people are realizing that, well, unless we physically go and take him out of the chair, he's not going to leave.
New versions of the Omicron variant are fueling a summer surge of COVID-19 across the United States. Health officials are urging Americans to return to wearing masks indoors. Coronavirus infections are growing by 6% nationwide, with more than 100,000 new cases reported each day over the past 2 weeks. CNN's Nadia Romero reports.
New CDC data shows about a third of the U.S. population is now living in a county with a high COVID-19 community level, which means the agency recommends universal indoor masking. Counties coast to coast are on the list. New York City, an early 2020 pandemic hotspot, is in a high-level area.
Our goal is to make sure whatever we put in place is going to stem the infections, keep down our hospitalization, and most importantly, keep down those who died from COVID.
Johns Hopkins University reporting new COVID-19 cases rising slowly. 108,000 new cases reported every day over the past 2 weeks, up around 6% from the 2 weeks prior. The spread of COVID-19 causing concern in Los Angeles County, too.
It is looking more likely, as cases and admissions have continued to increase, that we'll enter the high community level designation later this month.
Plus, health experts warn data on the rise in COVID-19 cases may not tell the full story due to the widespread use of at-home test kits.
On the honor system, if you test positive, you don't show up. And so that's not showing up in the data. So there's certainly more out there.
A recent preprint study based on health records from the Veterans Administration shows that catching COVID-19 over and over again appears to increase the chances a person will experience new and sometimes lasting health problems after their infection. People who had 2 or more documented infections had more than twice the risk of dying and 3 times the risk of being hospitalized within 6 months of their last infection. On the vaccine front, on Thursday, the White House saying only about 2% of children under the age of 5 have received at least 1 shot of the COVID-19 vaccine since the FDA gave emergency use authorization on June 17th for both the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. The 2 Omicron subvariants the CDC cites as the cause of the recent surge may partially escape the immunity produced by COVID-19 vaccines and prior infections. But experts say the current vaccines and boosters provide substantial protection against severe disease.
In people who are fully vaccinated, particularly people who are boosted in the vulnerable groups, we're not seeing a rise in ICU admissions. We're not seeing a serious rise in deaths. But what we are seeing is the gaps in immunity being exposed.
15 people have been killed and 9 others wounded in a shooting at a bar in South Africa. Police are searching for the gunman responsible for the attack in the township of Soweto. The BBC's Andrew Harding reports from Soweto.
A mass shooting on the outskirts of Johannesburg. The dead, all young men, taken away early this morning. Watched by grieving families. Some had gone into the tavern moments after the attack, hunting for relatives. Bodies were lying on top of each other, says Ntombi Meji. We had to climb over the bodies to look for our brothers. The police are still hunting for the attackers who used automatic weapons. But was this a gang turf war or something else?
As to what is the motive, currently we don't know, but our detectives are hard at work.
We've been speaking to a man who was working inside the bar when the gunman arrived. He said they didn't talk, they just opened fire at random. And most importantly, he says they stole nothing. He claims this was not a robbery. The killings have sparked deep anger in this desperately poor neighbourhood. Almost 2/3 of young South Africans are unemployed and tensions are rising.
We're going to have to use force.
1 year ago, violent riots left whole towns in ruins. Just last month, 21 partying teenagers died from suspected poisoning. And now this. But people are on edge now, are they?
Correctly so. They are on edge. They have reason to be.
They think this could happen again?
Yes, everyone is worried.
For now, a shocked community waits for answers.
Scientists and space enthusiasts all over the world are eagerly awaiting the release of the very first images from NASA's James Webb Telescope. Scientists are predicting the high-resolution images will change the way we see the universe. CNN's Kristen Fisher has the details.
And liftoff. 6 months after the most powerful telescope ever made launched into space, the team inside the Webb Space Telescope's flight control room is preparing to reveal what astronomers all over the world have been waiting for decades. The telescope's first full-color images, which are expected to be light years more impressive than the test images released last month, and will include the deepest image of our universe that's ever been taken.
Our view of the universe is definitely going to change on July 12th.
Ken Sembach runs the Space Telescope Science Institute in Baltimore, Maryland, home to Webb's mission control, and he predicts the day that Webb's first images are released will be on par with the day that Galileo became the first person to ever point a telescope to the sky.
There'll be a universe we knew before Webb and a universe we know after Webb. I really mean that. I think our perspective will change.
NASA says some of the images released on July 12th still need to be taken. Others have already been captured and are being kept secret. But NASA's leadership has gotten a sneak peek.
What I have seen just moved me as a scientist, as an engineer, and as a human being.
A sense of awe and frankly got emotional.
But getting emotional about the telescope is something Lee Feinberg has learned to bury after working on Webb for more than 2 decades. The telescope's most recent brush with death took place just a few weeks ago when a micrometeoroid struck one of the telescope's massive golden mirrors, which are critical for its operation.
Earlier in my career, it might have been a punch in the gut, but what I've learned about working on a big project like this is things are never as bad as they first seem or never as good as they first seem.
He was right. The telescope survived the strike, and NASA is now on the verge of handing this $10 billion telescope over to the scientists whose research proposals have been selected for the first year of observations.
It is just doing as well as we could have ever hoped, if not better. And so I think the scientists are just going to be extremely happy to use it. And we're going to be excited to see what gets, what comes out of it.
Some time for your thoughts before we head off on rodeos and their legality. This listener says, I cannot see that any recreational activity that potentially causes harm or suffering to animals who clearly experience pain and emotions can be ethically justified at any level. This also includes the racing industry, they say. Someone else says, my heart goes out to the working dairy owners. Well done from the police. That's in relation to the ram raid on the North Shore. This person says, I think Air New Zealand should be doing a deal with Kiwi Rail to get people around the country. That's Terry's idea after some disruption to flights. On the subject of the health system and it being in crisis, Mike says there needs to be a bipartisan commitment to provide the necessary funding by tax. That's all we've got time for this evening. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi pōpō. Tomorrow from 5 a.m, another doctor speaks to First Up about her concerns. The health system is on the brink of a catastrophic collapse. Have a great evening. We'll catch you tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Kia ora tātou, ko Aviation tēnei. Doctors are warning the government there is a risk of a catastrophic collapse of the healthcare workforce. A young Auckland family has been left traumatised after 10 youths ram-raided their North Shore dairy, which they live above. The Prime Minister has touched down in Suva for the 51st Pacific Islands Forum. And a consumer advocacy group says airlines that don't offer refunds when flights are cancelled could be breaking the law. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.
If you think RNZ has breached formal standards either on air or in our online content, you have the right to make a formal complaint. This must be made to the broadcaster first within 20 working days of the broadcast. To find out about those standards or to lodge a complaint, go to our website rnz.co.nz and type formal complaint into our search engine. You'll be directed to our formal complaints page. The standards were prepared by broadcasters, including RNZ.